is the Vice President of Business Services for the university. It's a packed agenda, and I know you're going to learn a lot today, so welcome, Henry.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out. Thank you to Liz and Ghislaine for inviting me to have this conversation. When I saw the topic, Ghislaine shared it to me, and she said, talking money, I thought I was going to give you my top 5 stock picks for the year, but I decided we'll concentrate on a little something different today. So this is really, let me just say this is really your time. I'm here to hopefully, give you some of the main concepts about RCM, the service level agreements, and then if we have enough time, we'll get into the financial state of affairs in higher education. But like I said, it's your time, so please use this to ask questions. If you just let me come up here for an hour and talk to you about this, it's going to get a little dry. Ask me your questions. I know a lot of people in particular have a lot of questions about the RCM budget and about the service level agreements that impacts many of our areas. So it's your time. Please feel free to ask. If you're shy and you want to send me an email later, that's fine as well. But let's make it interactive. I may pick on a few people because I know a few of you do have questions on these things. So let's get moving because we're a little bit going to be tight on time. But we're set up in a way where if, for instance, we can't get to the last bullet, I'm sure I can convince Ghislaine to bring me back for another hour session later on this year. So how does RCM work at Rutgers? Basically, the way this RCM, first of all, it's called Responsibility Center Management Budget. And what it does, it basically puts the revenues and the expenses in the units that generate them. So if you are a school out there, if you're the Department of Chemistry and you're bringing X number of dollars in tuition and fees, that revenue gets fully allocated to that unit. On top of that, they're also responsible for paying all the expenses associated directly with their areas, and they also have to contribute towards university support dollars that pays for areas like our facilities, our public safety area, our mail operations, and I'll get into those in a moment because they fall more into the service level agreements. But basically what it does, it takes the revenues, the direct and indirect costs, and it funnels them into the specific units, which are the schools, research centers, the auxiliaries, and any unit that's generating revenue and has expenses associated with them. This is just what I wanted to show you here. It's kind of a small illustration of our areas, right? So, any university, and Rutgers fits well into this, we have all kinds of operating expenses. And these don't just relate to institutional planning and operation, it's through the university, right? So we have all kinds of research and science buildings, we have a medical school, we have our academic units, we have library, we have our power plants, we have athletic events, stadiums. We are also responsible for the dorms. The dining halls fall not into IP&O, but into the university overall expense categories. There's new constructions that IP&O is involved with as well. But it's not just IP&O that provides the services here. So certainly some of the largest cost pools of the university is facilities and public safety. And along with that, another major cost area is our utility commodities. All the electricity, the water, natural gas, fuel. That's another large expense area. But besides us, there's also OIT services to provide the network, computing services to our students, faculty, and staff, and guests. So you can imagine, you've probably heard Tony all say before that I believe we're like somewhere around this, if we took all our properties and our assets together, we're somewhere around the 7th largest city in the state. So it's a big expense for the university our size. And this just kind of shows you all the various areas that we have. And you talk about mail operations, you have our bus shuttle services. It's very expensive. A bus shuttle, I think we're somewhere close to about $11 million in cost to run our bus system. It's a very large bus system. And so it takes up a lot of resources to do that. Now, I didn't list all of the system-wide cost pools. A lot of them are buried in the general administration. But here are some of the other areas. We talked about utilities. We talked about information technologies. Libraries is also considered a cost pool. It's a central support that everybody pays into, including us. Our auxiliaries, for instance, we pay a tax to support the library operations. There's research support, our operation and maintenance, our facilities, our areas like public safety, environmental health and safety, records retention. That's all in kind of general administration. It's kind of buried in there, but that's where those cost pools fall into. We have academic and student support. It's a big expense of the university. There's debt service, so our auxiliaries pay directly for their own debt service. If we put up a residence hall, if we put up a parking deck, our areas are responsible for covering the debt that's associated with those type of facilities. But on top of that, say for instance, the chemistry or engineering, they put up a building. There's a portion of that debt that the university has to cover that's not covered by necessarily the tuition and fees that are brought in for that area. And we pay towards that, our auxiliaries, not facilities, not public safety, because those are cost centers, all right? They're here to provide a service, so they don't get charged for that. But our auxiliaries, who are revenue generating areas within IP&O, parking, housing, the primary two large ones, we pay towards not just their direct debt, but we pay an indirect portion to support the university's overall debt as well. Any questions? Okay. So we kind of talked about this already, so I'm not going to repeat this. Again, the one thing I do want to hit on is probably the second bullet, that there's a matrix. And I often hear there's a lot of confusion about these matrix. But the matrix to allocate the cost pools, all the costs that I showed you in the previous slide to keep those areas operating, that cost gets distributed out to the responsibility centers, the schools, the auxiliaries, research centers, institutes. And the way the matrix works is that it's a mix. Some areas pay based on their expenditures. Some areas pay based on their square footage. Some areas pay based on their enrollment and tuition data. Some pay based on the F&A return. And some pay based on their faculty and staff FTEs. In some units, like ours, in IP&O, we pay on several of these areas. So it's not just one thing that we're paying off on the matrix. So in our areas, we're based off of expenditures, we're based off square footage, we're based off of staff FTEs. Those are the areas that we're made allocations through our expenses, how they come up with the tax or the RCM cost allocation that we need to contribute back to the university. And we'll get into the amounts of what that is in a little bit, but it's significant. And I'll talk about, well, I'll mention it to you now. In IP&O, we're paying close to $20 million in FY20. And that's our contribution to the university to support these areas. And that's a big portion of our revenue that comes from our auxiliaries. So, to get back to the service levels are based on agreements that we've established with the university for the services that we're going to provide to get our share of allocated resources provided to us by the central cost pools. And we have several of them, but I'll talk about the two major ones, the facility areas, or three we should say, facilities, public safety, and utilities, because those are the real three big buckets that cover our costs for RCM. And those, like I mentioned before, they are to provide the services to the university community. So it talks about, and we're going to get into it talks about, you know, how often are we going to clean classrooms? How often are we going to clean administrative buildings. You know, what's our maintenance going to look like? It's primary preventive maintenance that we're going to be doing, what's covered on the RCM. We'll get into a little of the details, and I hope you guys have a lot of questions about that, because that's where I hear there's a lot of confusion when not just in our own areas, but out in the university units, the RCM units, I should say responsibility units, they say, well, what am I paying? You know, if I'm paying X million dollars into the RCM cost pool to cover your facility costs, your utility costs, and your public safety costs, what am I getting for that? So we'll get into some of those details in a moment, and I think that's where I should be getting a lot of questions, I believe, because that's where there's always been a lot of confusion. But the SLA basically is just a commitment between us and the client to kind of specify what's the level of service we're going to provide. Are we going to clean bathrooms in a particular area once a day? Are we going to clean it twice a day? Are we removing trash daily, weekly? Depending on the area, that all changes. From a public safety standpoint, what are we providing? Are we providing police office coverage 24/7, 911 dispatch, security, EMS type of services? Those are all spelled out in the various service level agreements. So I put some of the bigger ones here. It's the facility, like I mentioned, transportation, public safety, mail, REHS, and the code office. These are all the areas that we've committed that we will provide services to the university for a share of those administrative RCM cost pools that we go into. And we're roughly, and I'll show you the pie in a moment, see how we're funded to get these areas. But there's more than these, but these are the ones that are most visible. For instance, my business office, we're in there. We get a small piece of the budget from the RCM cost allocation, but I don't have a service level agreement because that's internal to us. So the services that we do are internal to IP&O. I'm not providing any kind of business support from an accounting or a budgeting standpoint to the schools or the units out there. Same thing with our IT, our internal IT group. It's internal to us. So there is no real document for a service level agreement. So the service level agreements, it's basically to provide what's our baseline services. It means that we can't go below this level. All right? We can't have a unit come to us and say, well, if you're going to replace filters in an HVAC unit, we don't want you to do that because we want to pay less, so don't replace those filters. Or we don't want you to provide 24/7 police coverage. We only want you to do it during business hours or in the evenings. Well, the responsibility centers, the various units out there, they can't come back and dictate to us. Those are discussions that take place between John Shulak on the facility side, Ken Kopp for public safety side. They provide what that base level, the minimum service that we're going to provide for the budget that we request. And other than that, if they want a more a la carte or a higher level service, they can request that. But then those become the chargebacks. Those becomes the billables that we provide to them. So if somebody wants to come back and say, to public safety, hey, I want 3 security guards assigned to my building between the hours of 7 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon, that is an add-on service, and then that school or unit will have to pay for that service. Same thing with the facility side. If somebody comes and says, we have a special event, we want 3 custodians, we want 2 grounds people assigned to handle this special event, they'll go through our event services and they'll pay for that additional service. And for facilities, which is our big one, these are the areas that are covering our service level. It's our custodial housekeeping, our building maintenance, which is primarily really the PM piece of it. The energy and the utilities. The utility is a very large expense across the university. And the grounds and roads. Any question about this? No? It's a quiet group? Okay. So custodial housekeeping. So the main areas are the floor care, recycling and trash removal, cleaning and sanitizing, bathrooms, common areas, kitchens, special spaces. We provide the basic necessity for the areas such as soap in the bathrooms, paper, whether they're toilet paper, napkins in the kitchens, things of that nature. We provide those basic accommodations. The building maintenance, again, it's primarily the PM. It's the general repairs for services. It includes the mechanical, electric, air cooling, pest control, fire alarms, any of the safety things, fire extinguishers. So any of the basic components of the building is covered in our budgets by our facilities area. So that units don't have to pay. But if it's a specialized area, let's say it's in one of these high-tech labs, and they require some kind of special equipment, let's say to do, I don't know, moisture control or something in that lab. Those type of special equipments are not covered in our base costs. Those they need to fund separately to cover those type of maintenance requests. We have our utilities, providing, again, maintaining our plants, our cogen plants, electrical plants, maintaining the temperature at what we think is the appropriate levels, and that's debatable depending on who you are. Some people may think we keep it too warm, some people may think we keep it too cold, but that's managed by us, and that's in the basic cost pool packages. The grounds is a very important piece of what we do because, think about it, that's very visible. So if you are, whether you're working here, you're a student, a prospective student, a family, a visitor coming onto campus, it's kind of when you drive up and you kind of see how the place looks, right? That's the first impression. If you go any of the campus tours, you get a good feel about what they try to show the prospective students and their families. Those are things that are important to us. So we actually put in a good amount of effort, and Pat Harity, under Mike Minchell and John Shulak, does a phenomenal job with that. Those are areas that a lot of attention is needed, making the place look, nice and warming, making sure that when there's snow, all that snow has to be cleared. We now, as you know, many times have to close the university. There's expense when we do things like that. It's not just clearing the snow and making sure we have the ice melt put down, but we pay at a premium, right? Once we close the university, we pay our staff at a premium. It's not regular time. So those are large expenses that are associated with the grounds area. And they do the little things too, cleaning up, getting all the trash receptacles that we have all throughout the campuses. They need to maintain that, making sure that is being kept up with, and all the little stuff too, the tree prunings and maintaining the weeds. So they have to have a program that maintains, the grass. They mow their lawns, the level of fertilization. So it's a lot of work there, and they remind me that even the flagpoles they need to maintain. So it's a lot of effort that goes into that there. Before we get off of these questions, does anyone, and especially on the facility, because we're going to soon get off facility, we have maybe 1 or 2 slides, and then we're going to get into a little bit into public safety. Any questions about the cost? Yes, Gary.
Snow removal. Let's just say we have a really bad winter, and our snow removal costs exceed any prior year expense. Who pays for that then?
So that's on us. That's on us to figure out. Now, that doesn't mean that we couldn't make a plea to the university, but that plea is not simple. right, that plead has to go not just to the budget office, it also has to involve discussions with each of the chancellors, right? So for many of you, you know that we have a New Brunswick chancellor, we have a Newark chancellor, we have a Camden chancellor, and we have an RBHS chancellor. And we need to have a discussion with each and every one of them if we need to request more funding. And the thing is that depending on the circumstance, some may be in a better spot than others to provide additional funding. So ultimately, we need to do a job, and this is where our group works closely with the service provider, in this case will be grounds, to kind of say, okay, we had this level of expense, what can we do to try and lower some other costs to close a potential deficit gap we may have? And in a combination with getting some central relief, we may be able to do that. We also have the ability, we're fortunate because we're a large organization, we also have the ability to move funds around, right? So maybe we blew the grounds budget because of a very bad, weather incident that occurred, or several weather incidents. But maybe one of our other areas, had some savings, so we can shift dollars around to offset that. At the end of the day, the very first step is for us internally to try and figure out how to close that gap. And only if truly needed, if we can close that gap, then we need to go back to the budget office and to the chancellors to see what support, if any, they're willing to provide to offset those shortfalls.
Just a follow-up, in any other instance where, let's just say, we have a very good year, not just in snow removal, but in other expenses, and we have a lot of money left over, we actually have a surplus. Does that money belong to the chancellors, or does that belong to IP&O?
Well, the way it works is technically is university funds, and it does get funded through the chancellors. They would typically allow us to keep those funds as long as we're reinvesting them back into the areas, right? So I would tell you, to be honest with you, right now we don't have that issue. It's the other way around. We usually are finding how to plug the holes. But I like the way you think, and I hopefully we'll get there soon enough. That's a conversation I'd love to have with the chancellors, to be honest with you. Anything else? No? No question? Yes.
No question. So on the maintenance side, so many of our projects, right, when a renovation, we're planning for a renovation of space, mechanical equipment will often be triggered. It's determined that air handling unit is at the end of its usable life. So, typically that's getting rolled into the renovation budget. So you mentioned the maintenance piece covers more routine maintenance, right? What about major replacement or equipment that's end of its useful life?
Yep.
Is that sort of
Yeah.
typically rolled into
Yeah.
a renovation project, or is that is there a separate budget
Yeah.
for that?
So it all depends. So you just said a key word, right? If it's at the end, if it's useful life, it becomes deferred maintenance. And we'll talk about deferred maintenance in a second, but that is not covered in our basic maintenance cost pool budget. We do have some emergency dollars built into it. So for instance, I don't know, if we lose a main electrical feed into a building, right? Let's say it's to one of the main lecture halls. Well, I don't think anybody's going to allow us to basically say, well, we lost the electrical feed. We have to go to one of the chancellors where the lecture hall sits under, depending on what campus it's on or what area it falls under, and say to them, well, we're going to need $1 million to do this repair. And they're going to turn around and say, I don't have $1 million. Well, what are we going to say? We're going to say we'll close the building? We're not going to be able to do that. So we do have some contingency dollars built in for those type of extreme emergencies. They more fall in line with large utility areas, infrastructure type of needs, that we can cover that. But in a type of a renovation, if you're renovating, then it becomes part of that project, and then whoever is funding that project has to pick up that cost. Now, if it's a relatively new component and it goes bad, we have to kind of then research why did it go bad, and then the conversations then begin, and they're hard conversations to have to basically say, well, who's covering it? The unit is going to say, that's a new unit. It's less than 5 years. Why am I going to pay to get it replaced? We're going to say it's not built into our budget to cover that. the chancellor are going to say they don't have the money for it. So technically, those are then discussions that we get involved with. My office will get involved with. John's area will get involved with. And sometimes even Tony. I mean, they tend, sometimes they don't like my answer. They don't like John's answers. They may go to Tony. Tony will usually send them back to us. but that's the way it goes, right, John? But those are discussions that we start having. But typically, based on what you were saying, if it's past its useful life and it's part of a larger project, that will be part of the project cost. And the funding there comes into play. And I'll talk about deferred maintenance. I think we have a slide coming up, and maybe the next one or one other one after this. And anything else? No? Okay. So here's the deferred maintenance piece. So again, like I mentioned, we don't have a deferred maintenance cost pool. If you remember earlier, I showed you the various cost pool allocations, right? Operation and maintenance, public safety, the general administration, utilities. There is nothing, there's no bucket for deferred maintenance. And that's something that a lot of other institutions who have RCM do have dollars allocated to that. As a university, we haven't been able to get there yet, other than a kind of a short-term agreement that we reached with all of the chancellors back in FY17, and it was going to cover us for 3 years. It was going to cover fiscal years 17, 18, and 19. And we came to an agreed upon amount of deferred maintenance based on some priority projects that were established between the facilities areas and even the PD&D area were involved in those discussions, and the chancellors. And we came up with an agreement to say, under each chancellor, here are the projects that we're going to do over the next 3 years, and they were going to do the funding associated with that. And what many of them did is the university created a new program in 17 that was an internal bank. And that internal bank is managed through our university treasury group under the finance area. And what they basically did is basically say, well, Camden, if you want to do $3 million worth of projects, we're going to lend you money so you could fund those projects. And then you're going to take the amount, the principal, let's say it's a $3 million. They tagged on a small interest charge along with that. And then those chancellors would take that cost and spread it, in some cases, directly to the unit that was incurring the project and the cost. In other cases, they took the cost and spread it among all the units under the chancellor's areas. And that number was roughly about, for the 3 years, we were roughly around $45 million is what we received for a 3-year period of time. FY20, we've not received any allocated deferred maintenance dollars yet. There's new discussion going on with the university CFOs, the chancellor's CFOs, and the budget office to discuss what's this new model going to look like going forward. And the reason why there's a lot of discussion around that is because it was there was a lot of heated discussions that took place in that first year in FY17. So you had schools who were basically being told, you need a roof replacement. And that roof is going to cost you $1 million to replace. The schools pushed back and said, I didn't want this building. I happen to be occupying the building. I've been allocated this building, and now you're going to tell me that I got to pay for a roof replacement of $1 million. I don't have the money in my budget. And they would say to them, well, we're going to spread out the payments over the next 10 years. So you're only going to pay a portion. In some cases, they still fought back and says, well, we don't think that's right. We don't really have control over what work needs to be done in this building. So they were making the argument that if they want to do a light renovations like carpeting and painting of some office suites or classrooms, well, it's at their discretion. They can make that decision, and if they have the money to do it, they'll pay for it. But they're saying the roof, well, that's not discretionary. If the roof needs to be replaced, it needs to be replaced, and they don't have an option. So the discussion started to go, why as a school, as a unit out there, why do I have to have responsibility for covering that? And that made it all the way up to the president's office. And the president at that point in time pretty much said we have to rethink about deferred maintenance and the cost pool allocations and what is facility actually budgeted for it to do and what do we need to do to change. So the discussion is supposed to take place. Basically, the new model is supposed to be that anything that is tied to the building, if it's a part of the building, the roofs, the shell, the main components to make the building have the basic operations to make it occupiable, those should fall in a central cost pool and should be managed by IP&O through facilities. That was the discussion that took place in FY17. We're still working towards that. We're not there yet. And it's something that, we're going to have more. I'm actually having a meeting in November that's going to kind of resurface that and basically say, we're already going to be, first quarter of FY20 is pretty much behind us, and we still don't have funding to do some of these projects. Now, the reality is, and John knows this better than anyone else, there's always projects. So it's not like we're sitting here with no work to do. But, it's kind of dangerous for us to be sitting here without any funding for FY20. We're already starting to have discussions. In fact, Aaron just yesterday afternoon submitted our FY21 proposed budget to the budget office. So we're already talking about FY21. Well, we haven't even settled on FY20 yet. So those are tough discussions we're going to be having. But the way where we want to get to, and where a lot of other institutions are at, is basically there is a separate funding, separate cost pool, just like there is for utilities. That amount, in our case, we could easily go through $50, $60 million a year. We know we're not going to get that kind of money every year. To kind of maintain where we are, we probably need about $15 to $20 million a year, just to kind of keep at level state of where we are today. If we really want to start making a progress and reduce that level of deferred maintenance we keep at the university, we'll probably be closer to that $60 million per year. But we know we're not going to get that kind of money. Any questions about deferred maintenance? No?
Kelly, over here.
Yes.
Question. It may not be the permit. In the case that we have a building that may be collapsing, part of the building, should we go, what will be the process for it to get funding to replace, to fix that? Will it be that through the cost pool that you have, or an emergency?
Yeah.
And
So.
how will you do it?
Yeah, so that's a good question, right? So that discussion actually starts really with our PD&D group, right? There should be a discussion starting there to basically say, here's the issue we're having at this current building, and between PD&D and facilities, they would then put an analysis together about what's our recommendations, right? Because we would have to raise that to the chancellor's office in that area to basically say, well, for one thing, it's a safety issue, right? So our code official will get involved as well. What are we doing? Are we closing the building down? Here are some options to either mitigate the risk of the building collapsing. So I'm sure they always will ask for options, something that's basic just to kind of keep the building open and safe versus going all the way up to, a full-blown retrofit of the building if needed. And then we would need to have those discussions with the chancellor. Something like that most likely is going to have to come through some level of funding out of the chancellor's office. But that discussion, the one thing I will say, and this is important, that discussion should not take place at necessarily at the local levels. We have to be careful with that, right? Because the local level, like our groups, if you notice that is occurring in a special location, raise it up to your area, right? That kind of has to come up to John Shulak's area, Dave Schultz's area, all of them probably get involved so that we can put a good plan together. Because sometimes you have a lot of bad information out there too. Not done on purpose. It's not that it's done with malintent, but sometimes when the conversation takes place between, and I don't want to pick on everyone, but let's just say it takes place between a maintenance mechanic and a local user, right? where is that discussion going to go? That's a bad discussion to be having there. It needs to be brought up through the right channels so that a bigger, discussion can take place, a more strategic discussion can take place. I'll give you a very good example. There is one building on the Douglas campus that I was just made aware of last week has a structural issue, right? And it happens to fall under a building that we, or IP&O, is responsible, not just for maintaining, but we're kind of the space owners for it. I talked to the area that's kind of had interest in the space or who was temporarily using the space, and they no longer want anything to do with that building, right? So now that discussion is going to go up to Dave Schultz's area, right? And he'll have a discussion with the chancellor, and we'll see what happens. And the options are going to be basically there's an option where we could mitigate the structural issue, and it will be at X dollars to do that, but it may not be that appealing to the users of the space from an aesthetic standpoint. There's another option where if you spend maybe 3 times the amount, now you'll mitigate the risk and you'll also make it look nice as well. Or there may be the option that the building should come down, right? Or repurposed for something else. So that's why I'm saying those discussions need to rise up a little bit higher. But ultimately, for something like that, I'm 95% sure that usually the funding is going to fall in line with the chancellor, unless the chancellor says, I don't need that space. Take it down or do something else, repurpose it. Other questions? Yes.
As far as energy and utility costs that come from suppliers, is that a constant cost that's normally, is that negotiated like ahead of time for several years? And if so, is there a strategic conversation occurring that would allow us to create projects in-house that would allow us to reduce those costs and then maybe take some of those cost savings year to year and put that into a deferred maintenance budget?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So yes, to the first part of your question, we do have a group that is managed through our utilities area with also some assistance from my business area. There's a committee that basically looks at our costs. They look at our contracts from the commodities that we purchase. We establish long-term agreements with the utility providers to try and make sure that we're getting the best price possible. We also have some hedging strategies that we look into, and we also have an outside consultant that helps us with those hedging strategies. And we try to balance those costs. The second part of your question about do we look for opportunities to do projects that then lower our utility costs? Yes, we do that as well. So there's been times where we've been able to go to chancellors and basically say, if we do some retrofitting on lights, for instance, right, there's a grant at the state level that will basically match us dollars for dollar. So if we put a $2 million investment, we will get a grant for $2 million as well. And usually what we do is we go to the chancellors and we say, are you willing to fund a portion of that $2 million internal cost to the university? And when we show them the return on the investment to basically say, so, just for argument's sake, let's say one chancellor is going to fund, $200,000, another one would do another $2 million, and that's how we come up with our $2 million internally. We show them that $200,000 investment that they're doing today, that the energy costs in their areas will drop over the next few years, and they'll probably recoup their investment within the next, say, 3 to 4 years, and then by year 4, year 5, they're going to actually start seeing some savings. Now, they hold us true to that. These chancellors are, they have finance individuals in their areas, and they put that on their radar. They start saying, okay, Henry, you said we were going to save $50,000 a year starting in year 3. They'll come back and ask, did you reduce your budget by $50,000 for my area? So they will look at that. Or they may turn around and say, that $50 savings, we want you to find another project that you can invest that $50,000 into and then continue to do some offset and reductions. We have done a really phenomenal job as a group reducing our utility costs. Our budget, I want to say going back probably to the 16, 17 year, I want to say that budget was close to about $89, $90 million, right? Today, our budget coming in is about $65 million. Now, that doesn't include our utilities that pay for their own utilities. That's probably another, I don't know, close to maybe $18, $20 million. But in total, we probably have saved over the last 3 to 4 years about $5 million, $6 million we've reduced our utility costs. So it's been a great job. So for all the folks out there who are doing that, it's been phenomenal, and I really appreciate all that effort. And there's more work. I always get, is Teddy in here? No? Teddy always comes to me with the next great idea about how he can do a project and reduce costs. I wish I had all the money he needs, but we just don't. But they've done a great job. Anything else on this before we move on? All right, get into our public safety area. So the reality is this is one of our most important areas at the university. And I give, the public safety area a lot of kudos for the work they do. It's important. I'm a finance guy, right? So this kind of stuff, the safety of the campus doesn't keep me up at night, but I give them a lot of credit for the work they do because ultimately it does impact in a university, all right? So we have any major incident that occurs on any university campus always has a direct impact on finances right after the incident occurs, right? Because think about it, if you have a major event that occurs, what's the first reaction? Well, we're going to have to put more money into the safety. That's the first reaction that any institution has. Second impact is going to be, well, what's the reputation of the institution? And that sometimes is very hard to calculate what those costs may be, but you now may have some students and families who says they may give it a second thought whether they want to go send their son or daughter to an institution where an event just might have occurred. So it's an important area, and it does impact the finances. The service levels for them, again, there's nothing here that would surprise you, right? They run a 24/7 operation. They run the 911 communications. I do want to pause for a second on this 911 communication. So, Ken and his team did a great job a little over a year ago to working out a separate service level agreement, not related to a university, but one with the city of New Brunswick. So the city of New Brunswick was at a point where they were looking to outsource their 911 communication center, and they were doing an RFP. And through Ken's connection, New Brunswick reached out to him and said, would you be interested in being one of the responders to this RFP? Ken looked at it. Ken thought it would be a good opportunity for us to provide the service. It then turns out that they basically said, we don't even know if we want to do an RFP anymore. We think the plan, the level of support that can be provided by RUPD and the 911 communication is everything New Brunswick was looking for. It was going to save the city money. And we ended up signing an agreement, service level, with the city of New Brunswick. And that's apart from what we have at the university. But it helps the university side as well because it's going to bring in some additional dollars, lower costs for the city, brings in an extra revenue stream for us to cover our added costs for providing that service, but then also has an offshoot for some additional dollars that then we can reinvest in other technologies and things that public safety may need and lowers our costs internally. So that is a great job and a great example of how we as a large part of the university can also provide service to the community and try to start lowering our costs. I'm going to move a little bit faster through this because there's nothing again here that should surprise you, but stop me if you have any questions. The emergency management group is in here as well, and also the protection of minors. That's a big, after what occurred in Penn State, that's when this thing came through, right? And that's a great example of what I said earlier about how an incident in an institution or a college automatically has a direct impact on their finances and their reputation. And then has a ripple effect across the country, because then all of a sudden all the schools needed to apply to these new regulations that came out of legislation to basically say the protection of minors. Any questions about public safety? Again, I covered this earlier. General description of incremental services. It's basically any service that falls outside of our baseline services. There will be a charge for that. Questions? All right. So our total funding in FY19 was a little over $500 million, $555 million. Now, out of that, the blue slice is basically what we receive from a cost pool allocation from the university. And that is just for our base services, facilities, public safety, utilities, and you see the numbers here. The others, the auxiliaries, I'm not going to talk about that today. The recovers and billables, I'm not going to talk about that today. But the 202, that's our cost pool for FY19. And that's the breakdown of how the funding, the 202, was allocated out to our areas. So you can see the heavy hitter here are facilities at 36%, utilities at 32%, public safety at 11%. Any questions about these? All right. And just an example, so like if you look at the PD&D area, that's primarily real estate, space management, and then some administrative support for that area. So our expenditures, total expenditures, this is not just for our cost pool, but total IP&O division-wide. Our labor costs were at 26%, non-labor at 55%, utility 15%, overtime 3%. Left us with just shy of $3.8 million as retained earnings. For some of you who were in another presentation I gave a week or two ago, you probably heard me say that, a lot of times people get excited to say, oh, we finished in the black by $3.8 million. It's actually pretty bad for an organization our size. A $500 million operating organization, and that's what we're finishing with about a 1% margin. We really should be closer to $11 million, easily $11 million. And we would have hit that if it wasn't because we had to plug holes in areas. Our auxiliaries would have generated about $11 million. So there's a lot of work that we need to do in this area, because that retained earnings is the monies that we use, the funding that we use to go in and do projects and deferred maintenance and upgrades to our auxiliaries, residence halls, parking decks, student and rec centers. So, nobody gives us money for that. We have to fund that ourselves, and that's usually what we rely on, is on our retained earnings. Any questions before I get into this current state of higher education? Are we doing okay with time, Liz?
Yeah, it's just about 10 to 11.
Okay, all right. I'll kind of go through this a little bit quick, but before we get on to this, any questions? No? Okay. So, current state of affairs in higher education. These are the typical expense categories that you would find at any college or university. The one in the center is usually the biggest and most expensive piece. It's the institutional, the instruction pieces, the academic side of the house. And then the things surrounding it all are part of the instruction-based but they're portions of it. The biggest costs are the instruction pieces there. But we know that we need to provide financial aid to students. That's a cost. The student services, academic support, public service, we have technology, there's debt the university has, institutional support, research, the O&M and utilities. Those all contribute to costs of a university. And by the way, what I'm going to start talking about here, this is not about just Rutgers. This is about higher education in general. So this is not unique to Rutgers. Instruction makes up the largest single expense category. You can see on this graph here how much of it costs an institution. That's where all the funds are really going to cover that instructional costs. You can see operation and maintenance, although a lot of people think it's one of the biggest costs for a university. You can see very little funding goes towards that. This is specific to Rutgers. This is our FY19 information. The primary revenues, 4.3 billion. And that's broken down by the various categories there. The biggest amount that we're getting is the state appropriations, patient care, grants and contracts, and the student tuition and fees make up the large revenue streams for us. Our expenses are almost 4.4. So as you can see, in FY19, we spent more than we brought in. That's not a good sign, and I'll talk about that in a short moment. That's a bad sign, but the reality is most institutions are operating at this kind of level. And the biggest costs here, again, are our salary and fringe. 65% of our costs are salary and fringe related. Look at deferred maintenance. Somebody asked, Laura, you asked about deferred maintenance before. 0.5% of our total expense, or our revenue, even if you want to look at it, is going to deferred maintenance. That's nothing. Compared, for an institution our size, with the number of buildings we have, with the aging infrastructure and buildings we have, that is a bad position we're in. But again, true at Rutgers, true at many other institutions as well. You know, this is probably not new news to anyone here, but states are investing much less in higher education than they did even a decade ago. Tuition and fees are an all-time high. If anybody has, children or relatives who are in colleges, universities today, or getting ready to go in the next year or two, if you're already pricing things out, you're probably going to go through some sticker shocks. It's not cheap. It's a lot of money going into higher education, and the cost of tuition and fees are skyrocketing. And again, the landscape is starting to change. Our demographics is changing. How we deliver instructional is changing. Technology is having a big impact on that as well. The workforce needs, by that I mean the external, what organizations are expecting from graduates, that's changing quite a bit. The funding and cost structures, and then the perception of value is big. People are now today starting to really make their decisions about what schools they're going to go to based on the perception. Is it worth paying $50,000 to get a degree in whatever it is you're looking to get into if another school offers the same degree at half the price? We know students and families are struggling to afford the cost of coming to a university. While these increases for tuition and fees have increased, it's not kept pace with the cost of an institution, like I showed you at Rutgers before, right? We all know tuition and fees have gone up here at the university, yet even with those increases, we're still spending more than what we're bringing in as an institution. I'll move down to the next bullet. This one was interesting to me when I was doing some of this research, that Since 2016, there's been more than 100 for-profit and 20 non-for-profit colleges, primarily the liberal arts one, have closed their doors. And you're starting to see the trend is that we're going to see more and more that occurred over the next 5 to 6 years. You're actually starting to see a lot of these smaller liberal arts schools starting to look to combine and consolidate with other institutions to kind of reinvent themselves. But that's a bad sign. You could see here, this is an eye tester for those folks really in the back here, but we kind of try to fix it a little bit, kind of show you where New Jersey falls, right? But you know, higher education remains below the pre-recession levels of most states. So New Jersey is kind of on the high end, right? So we're not doing well here either. And then tuition increase. So you can see, in our case, in New Jersey, again, this is not specific to Rutgers only, but all of the New Jersey schools, Rutgers included, our tuition has gone up, but luckily for the folks who are paying the bills for their son or daughters to come to university, it hasn't gone up as drastically as some of the other states. I mean, look at Louisiana, they're at 105% increase. So we kind of covered this. College costs continue to rise well above the rate of inflation. Household income can't keep pace. You know, and students and families are relying heavily on student loans, and that's something as administrators in higher education and the leaders of higher education need to start taking a hard look at that. Because, and this is my opinion only, there's nothing else other than my opinion. I think colleges and universities and the cost of colleges and university and the amount of loans the students are taking out to attend these schools, that's the next bubble that's going to burst. The next financial bubble is going to burst. You know, we saw it in the banking industry. We saw it, you know, with the mortgages, how people were taking out all these outrageous loans for mortgages, and then banks knew they couldn't, these families couldn't pay that, and they were still giving them the loans. We're on the verge of another bubble collapse, and it's going to be in higher education with these costs. That's my opinion. Student loans, look at this, $1 trillion. $1 trillion of student loan debt is what's estimated out there. It's grown twice of what it was in 2007. It now surpasses the credit cards and debt for cars and loans. And it's saying it's only second to mortgages. And I'll tell you why, my hunch, the only reason why it's not higher than mortgages is because families are taking out mortgages to pay for these costs. That's the only reason why it's not. Again, that's my opinion, but I think we will be higher than even mortgages. And again, what's going to happen with these students who graduate with these, you know, large amount of debt? They're going to graduate and they're going to say, well, now I can't afford to pay for rent for an apartment, let alone, you know, purchase a property. Am I going to be able to afford a car? I mean, just think about a $30,000, let's just say a student graduates with $30,000 in loans, which is kind of low for today, right? $30,000. How many years do you think it would take that person to pay off $30,000 at a nominal 4% interest, paying a minimum payment of, say, you know, minimum payment is usually 2%.
Minimum payment?
Yeah.
It's 30 years.
Pretty close.
That's what they have it scheduled for.
Yeah, pretty close. 22 years, that's at 600, that's because at 2%, right? And that's at $30,000 loan. That's, some of these students are graduating with close to $100,000 in loans. You raised your hand? Yeah, yeah. So it's a tough place for people to be today. Let me see what I did here. All right, so let's go here. Again, what I'm going to talk about over the next couple of slides, and we have a few minutes?
We have, it's 11 o'clock. so
Okay.
Nobody's in a hurry to
Is-
leave. We can-
We're at 11. It should only take me another 5-10 minutes at max here. What I'm going to share with you next, it's just purely my opinion. It's nothing that Rutgers or higher education is promoting or necessarily maybe in agreement with. Purely my views. But you've probably heard Tony say before that the college model, the way it exists today, it's broken and needs to be rechanged. And I agree with that 100%. And I think we need to start trying to salvage the institution of yesterday and really start to focus on envisioning tomorrow. What should we be focusing on as any type of higher education institution? We need to be looking at our enrollment levels, especially the non-traditional students. You have a lot of students today who just can't afford to come to college right after high school. Some of them may need to get a job. Some of them may need to do other things. And we need to focus on how we can bridge that gap so that they can work, go after other things that are in their best interest, but still allow them an opportunity to take courses and work towards a degree, even if it takes them 7, 8 years, 10 years to complete. The student experience is very key. The student experience is probably one of the most important things that institution needs to start focusing on. And I truly believe this. A happy student in their years at any institution are the ones that are going to come back someday and going to pay it forward. They're the alumni, they're the donors, they're the ones who, if they have a positive experience where they attend, they're going to take a lot of pride in their institutions, and they're the ones who are going to be willing to give something back. Even if it's minimal, they'll give something back to their institution. If they have a bad experience or one where they felt the university didn't do right by them, you think that person is going to give any money back to the institution or look to come back and do a graduate degree or something else, a PhD with that institution? Probably not. We need to maximize our funding resources. We've done a great job here with the P3s. Institutions are doing this more and more every year. We need to explore that further. We always are looking for an opportunity of what third party out there can access funding that we as an institution cannot access. Those are the deals we want to cut. We don't want to sell off our assets. Some universities are starting to sell off their assets. In my mind, that's a bad idea. Solves problems for today, but in the long run, it's going to hurt them. Because I'll tell you what, these private entities out there who are willing to buy off an institution assets, they're in for the money. They're not in for it to do right by the institution. So they may give you some incentives up front to make the deal appealing, but they know over time, they got you, and they're going to make the money. And the last bullet here, the change of delivery of education through technology. That's key. We're doing that here at Rutgers already. A lot of institutions are starting to do that as well. And I think that's gonna have a major impact on how a future higher ed institution is gonna look like. We need to be able to react to the economy shifts, right? So everybody heard what happened recently in the oil fields, right, in the Middle East. That's going to have an impact on us, not just on our daily operating costs. I'm sure we're going to see escalation costs on construction and everything else. The next bullet is very key. This is something that institutions in higher education, I think, do a very poor job at. Everybody wants to talk about, we got to cut costs, we got to cut costs, we got to cut costs, right? Or we got to bring in more revenue, find more ways to bring in revenue. But nobody wants to take a hard look at who are the winners and who are the losers in those areas, right? The winners continue to do well and to continue to get resources. The losers continue to get subsidized. And that's a big area, and that's something that, institutions that continue to do that are going to find themselves, they're going to get themselves in a deep hole that they're not going to be able to get themselves out of. It's time to really start looking at every area. And I know the academic side of the house may not like to hear this, but I think more and more of them are starting to see why it's important. You have to take a hard look, and it has to have a financial modeling behind it to kind of show, can this program stand on its own 2 feet? And if it can't, but it's still critical to the mission of the institution to keep that program, then how is it going to be funded over a period of time? And how can the institution help that area get on its own 2 feet to break even, hopefully in a short period of time as well? But nobody wants to have that conversation. Everybody just wants to talk about cut. Again, we got to preserve the core principle of higher education. And again, my opinion here, we need to start looking at the students and the families, you know, and the partners we have in the community and the state. We got to start seeing them as our investors, right? No different than, you know, a Fortune 100 company does with their investors. We're competing. We're competing for students. We're competing for top talent from a faculty staff standpoint. We want the best students, and we want students to come to the institution that we're at. It's tough, and I'm starting to see, I just recently had my daughter graduate high school, and she just started her first year in college a few weeks ago. And you'll be surprised how some institutions do a little better job at this than others right now. But I think eventually everybody's going to get to a point where some institutions are starting to show you, you know, some real good numbers of why you should go to their place. And it's not just about, you know, who has the best student life support. It's a big sell for the kids for sure. But for the parents, it's about job placement. It's about what are they doing after graduation. They're going to, you know, a graduate program. Where are the places they're going to work? That data is out there. Students, you know, prospective students can see that instantly. They can say, you know, if I want to go work at Google, or I want to go work at Apple, or I want to go work for whoever, you can go see where the pipelines to those companies are. You know, does Rutgers have a pipeline to these areas? You know, what other schools have pipelines? Those are the ones. So if you have an interest, you're starting to compete for that, and I think that's going to be really important. And then the last bullet is the brand and the reputation is what we talked about before. You know, that's an area that is very important. We have to continue to brand ourselves. We have to protect the reputation of the university, and I think that holds true of any university. It's key. Everybody's looking to kind of say, where's my best value? Where are we going to go? Where are we going to send our kids? And I think those decisions, you know, are being really tough discussions to have. And I had to have that with my daughter. And I had to say to her, as far as I can see, is your money. Your mom and I, we've put something together that we're going to give to you. You need to decide what it is. Where do you want to go? What do you want to study? What do you want to do? It's your money, right? You have to make a wise decision, and you have to think about not just about what the next 1 or 2, 3 years look like. What do you look like in 4 or 5 years? And that's going to be important, and we've kind of put that into her head to kind of say, you got to make wise decisions, just like we need to, as parents, we need to make wise decisions. And it's going to be around, where do you think your money is best invested in? I had no interest paying $50,000, $60,000 to a school that hardly anybody ever heard of, and their rates are that high. Why? Why pay that kind of money? And then on top of that, they don't even have some of the programs that gives you enough flexibility that what if, God forbid, first year in, you decide whatever I started thinking I was going to major in is not what I like anymore. And now something else you want to explore is no longer offered there. Now you're transferring out. In some cases, you just might have thrown $30,000, $40,000 out the window for 1 year. And then this last piece again, you're seeing more companies are starting to align with colleges and universities and to really start creating those pipelines and really starting to say what they need in the future generations to employ them. And colleges and universities are really starting to take a hard look at those requirements from the industry to kind of prepare their students a little bit better for that. The last piece is the service to the community. That's important. The more service we provide our community, the more service we give to the state, the better we position ourselves as an institution to really be able to show how we bring value, not just to the state and the families, but ourselves, an institution. You know, where should we be putting our resources? So the service, everybody talks about the academic, very important. The research is very important. The service piece, I think, is just as critical as them. And I'm just going to wrap this up real quick by just showing you this video. I don't know if everyone has seen it before, but it's a short video. It should only be about 2 minutes. You can see it up there. Okay. Okay.
What better economic engine can you have than a great research university? Rutgers fuels the New Jersey economy by generating $5.2 billion in economic activity. For every dollar Rutgers receives from the state, it generates nearly $7 in economic activity. Rutgers conducts more than $650 million in research that supports the New Jersey economy. That's a total greater than all other universities in the state combined. We support nearly 58,000 jobs as the state's third largest employer, and we devote millions to helping people stay healthy with outstanding patient care. Rutgers is teaching our future leaders and boosting the economy.
All right. So that ends the presentation. Any questions? No? I know I ran over. Thank you for sticking with me. I just want to say a couple of real quick thank yous. Jen Sosa and Sue Burr, thank you so much for, putting this presentation together. I really appreciate all the support and help there. Aaron and the business staff throughout IP&O, they do a phenomenal job really keeping us in line, making sure that, we make the important pleads for the budgets that we required. So I really want to thank them, and certainly all of you, because you're the ones that make it happen. And I appreciate all the level of work and support each and every one of you do. I truly believe Rutgers is a much better place today, even from just 10 years ago, let alone when I first started here in '93. So it is, I've seen the growth occur here, and it's all because of the hard work of people in this room and others throughout the university. So thank you, and let's continue to move forward and make Rutgers the place where students and their families want to be a part of.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.